Television network Al Jazeera's bureau in the West Bank has been raided by Israeli soldiers. The broadcaster says it's been ordered to close its doors for the next 45 days. For some discussion on this, let's bring in Peter Greste, who is former Al Jazeera correspondent and professor at Macquarie University, and who is now also executive director for the Alliance for Journalist Freedom. Hi there, Peter. Great to have an ex-detainee on the show with me. This story must resonate with you because, yeah, I mean, back then, about 10 years ago, Egypt claimed that Al Jazeera was the mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood, and now it's claiming that Al Jazeera is the mouthpiece for Hamas. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, in my view, this is ridiculous. It's like saying that Sky News is a mouthpiece for the Australian government because it happens to broadcast a news conference by the Prime Minister or statements from members of the Cabinet. Obviously, as a news organisation operating in the West Bank, in Gaza and out of Lebanon, Al Jazeera is going to be broadcasting the views of the authorities that run those places. That doesn't make them a mouthpiece for those organisations. It can be very difficult sometimes. It can sometimes look as though you can be an apologist, but that's simply because you're seeing and understanding the world from that particular perspective. Al Jazeera has been widely recognised as one of the most authoritative news organisations operating in the occupied territories. And most news organisations have condemned the Israeli government's decision to close the bureau down. I think it's a very bad look, particularly for a country, Israel, that insists it is a champion of liberal democratic values.
And so far, they have shown no evidence that Al Jazeera personnel have ties to terrorist organisations, yet they suspect they do.
That's right. Well, all that they've said from the statements that we've seen is that Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece for terrorism and that it's been inciting terrorist activity. And again, as you say, without actually showing any evidence whatsoever. So it's very difficult to know what basis the Israeli authorities are making this decision, apart from the fact that that Al Jazeera has been covering Israeli actions in the occupied territories in Gaza and in the West Bank. They are in Gaza. They're the only organisation that still has international news organisation that has journalists based there. They have also been operating very aggressively across the West Bank, and that is. Given the way that, given the extent of Israel's military actions, given the extent of a lot of the settler actions, the settler attacks on Palestinians, it's not always going to be a good look. It's not always going to be flattering for the Israeli authorities, and I suspect that is why they may have decided to act now.
How political is this? Because we know that Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar, and Qatar is where many of the Hamas leaders actually live. Can any outlet be totally impartial these days?
Look, my experience of working for Al Jazeera, and I was with the network for about 4 years, was that it really didn't interfere in the editorial. The government didn't interfere in the editorial content of the news organisation. As I said, clearly Al Jazeera has a view of the crisis from Qatar, from the West Bank. And so it's going to be a very different view, a very different understanding from the way it might look from Jerusalem. But I also think that speaks to the importance of allowing news organisations to operate across the region so that they can, in fact, cover it with balance and perspective. But as I said, there is no evidence that just because Al Jazeera is financed by the Qatari government, it is acting as a mouthpiece for the Qataris. The thing that I came to understand was the Qataris recognised the soft power, the kind of regional influence that an independent news organisation could have. They based the model for Al Jazeera on the BBC World Service. They saw the way that the World Service operated. They saw the influence that it had and the credibility and authority that it gave the government. And they tried to duplicate that, and they recognised, in my view, the fact that a lot of that soft power, a lot of that influence came from the fact that the news organisation was able to operate independently and with real credibility and authority.
Now, tragically, the bureau chief at Al Jazeera West Bank had lost his family in air raids. How do journalists remain keep this impersonal?
Look, it's incredibly difficult. As you well know, when you're the subject of or the target of attacks, or you've suffered under the attacks of a government, it's very difficult to remain genuinely objective. But good journalists have ethics and standards and guidelines and editorial oversight in place that helps them maintain a degree of independence and authority. You can never entirely remove your own personal perspective, but I think as long as you're transparent about it, there's no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to continue to operate. And as we've been discussing, the fact is that we haven't seen any evidence that Al Jazeera has been acting as a mouthpiece for Hamas or for the Palestinian Authority or for any terrorist organisation. It's simply been doing its job.
Peter,
covering
one.
and broadcasting the events.
Peter, a final quick question. Given the unprecedented conflict we're seeing today, what's the number one priority for protecting press freedom, given that it's much easier and faster to misinform the public?
Look, and I think this is absolutely crucial. The problem is that without good, authoritative, credible, independent news organisations able to operate in places like the West Bank, we're increasingly relying on social media posts, and we know that they're unchecked, they're untested. There's often a tremendous amount of fake news embedded in it, and so we really do need to support and protect independent news organisations. Al Jazeera is no different. I think we need governments and voices like ourselves to speak loudly and clearly in support of Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much for your analysis, and look forward to seeing you one of these days. Peter Greste, former Al Jazeera correspondent and also professor at the University of Macquarie.